Come back to you on this question of the existence of God. Why would God randomly decide to provide proof of his existence to a small group of Jews 2,000 years ago and not subsequently provide any proof after that?
Well, I don't think there's ever been any scientific proof. I don't believe God does anything randomly, although he might set up a system which works apparently through through chance, through random. But if you want to get something done, you've got to ask somebody. It's no good, say, my asking everyone in the congregation, "Will you do something?" Normally, you go to a busy person because you know they'll do it. And so, for some extraordinary reason, God chose the Jews. They weren't intellectually the equal of either the Egyptians or the intellectually, morally.
How can you know intellectually?
Because you see the fruits of their civilization. Egypt was the great power for thousands of years before Christianity. Persia was a great power. Chaldea. The poor, the little Jewish people, they were originally shepherds. They were stuck, they're still stuck between these great powers.
That's not a reflection of your intellectual capacity, is it, whether or not you're a shepherd?
Well, no, it's not, but it's a recognition, it is a reflection of your intellectual development. But like many people are very, very clever and not highly intellectual. But my point is...
So can I just interrupt? Are you including Jesus in that, who obviously was Jewish and was of that community?
Exactly.
So intellectually not up to it?
Well, that's a nice try, Tony. The people, in terms of sophistication, the Psalms are remarkable. In terms of their buildings and that sort of thing, they don't compare with the great powers. But Jesus came not as a philosopher to the elite. He came to the poor and the battlers. And for some reason, he chose a very difficult, but actually they are now an intellectually elite, because over the centuries they've been pushed out of every other form of work. Jesus, I think, is the greatest, the Son of God, but leaving that aside, the greatest man that ever lived. So I've got a great admiration for the Jews, but we don't need to exaggerate their contribution in their early days.
All right, you're watching Q&A. Remember, you can send...
Now, we believe that the first humans developed in South Africa. I'm not quite sure how long ago, and that all the humans have developed from that. We know most about that. There aren't remains. We know most about that because of the drawings they left on walls and caves and that sort of thing. No such thing from Neanderthals. So we can't say exactly when there was a first human, but we have to say if there are humans, there must have been a first one. There might have been equal first, but if there is a progression, there's got to be first.
So are you talking about a kind of Garden of Eden scenario with an actual Adam and Eve?
Well, what Adam and Eve are terms, what do they mean? Life and earth. It's like every man. That's a beautiful, sophisticated, mythological account. It's not science, but it's there to tell us two or three things. First of all, that God created the world and the universe. Secondly, that the key to the whole of the universe, the really significant thing, are humans. And thirdly, it's a very sophisticated mythology to try to explain the evil and the suffering of the world.
But it isn't a literal truth. You shouldn't see it in any way as being an historical or literal truth.
It's certainly not a scientific truth, and it's a religious story told for religious purposes.
And just quickly, because the Old Testament in particular is full of these kind of stories. I mean, is there a point where you distinguish between metaphor and reality? For example, Moses receiving the Ten Commandments inscribed directly by God on a mountain.
I'm not sure that the Old Testament says that God inscribed the Ten Commandments, but leaving that aside, it's difficult to know how exactly that worked, but Moses was a great man. There was a great encounter with the divine. Actually, with Moses, we get the key that enables us to come together with the Greeks with reason, because Moses said, "Who will I tell the Egyptians?" And he said, "Tell that my name is I am who I am."
Okay, I'm going to bring Richard Dawkins back in here, because we've moved from evolution, obviously, to the biblical versions of it. Your response?
Well, I'm curious to know if Adam and Eve never existed, where did original sin come from? But I also would like to clarify the point about whether there ever was a first human. That's a rather difficult and puzzling question, because we know that the previous species from which we're descended is probably Homo erectus, and before that some sort of Australopithecine. But there never was a last Homo erectus who gave birth to the first Homo sapiens. Every creature ever born belonged to the same species as its parents. The process of evolution is so gradual that you can never say, aha, now suddenly we have the first human. It was always a case of just a slightly different from the previous generation. That's a scientific point, which I think is quite interesting. I'm not sure if it has theological significance, except that I think successive popes have tried to suggest that the soul did indeed get added, rather like gin to tonic, at some particular point during evolution. At some point in evolution, there was no soul, and then later there was one. So it is quite an interesting question to ask. Now we have rather a good fossil record from Africa of the descent of humans, from Australopithecines to various species of Homo, perhaps Homo habilis, perhaps Homo erectus, then archaic Homo sapiens, and then modern Homo sapiens. At what point did the soul get injected? And what does the idea of original sin mean if Adam and Eve never existed?
I'll just quickly let you respond to that.
Well, I mean, God wasn't running around giving injections. And if there is no first person, where did
the soul come from then?
The soul is a principle of life. But there are animal souls. All living things have some principle of life. An animal has a principle of life. A human has a soul, a principle of life, which is immensely more sophisticated. We even have a voice box, which is one of the great miracles, so that we can communicate our thoughts to one another rather than just grunting.
I'm pleased we're not grunting tonight. Let's move along.
My question is for George Pell. George, as a climate change skeptic, you demand a very high standard of evidence to support the hypothesis that global warming has an anthropogenic cause. My question is, why then do you not demand the same standard of evidence for the existence of God?
George Pell.
I'm very, very happy to answer that. First of all, I'm not a sceptic about climate change. I grew up in Ballarat. The weather was always shy. I worked for years in Melbourne. If you don't like the weather in Melbourne, wait 20 minutes. Think of all the nonsense people like Flannery told us about years of drought here, and now we're coping with flood.
So can I just clarify that you're a sceptic about global warming leading to climate change?
I'm skeptical about the human contribution to dangerous climate change. I think that is not established.
Is that because you're sceptical about scientific consensus? And is that partly driven by what scientists believe about religion?
No, it's got nothing to do with it. On the weather question, I go on the evidence. When you come to talk about God, that is not a scientific question. The scientists concede that. It is a question that is open, I believe, to reason. You have to reason about the facts of science, ask whether you believe that the suggestion that random selection is sufficient, and also most evolutionary biologists today don't believe that.
Don't believe what?
They don't believe in this crude fundamentalist version of random selection that you propose.
I do not propose it, and I strongly deny that evolution is random selection. Good. Evolution is non-random selection.
Oh, so there's a purpose to it, is there?
No.
Could you explain what non-random means?
Yes, of course I could. It's my life's work.
It's a hard thing to say, but keep it brief.
There's random genetic variation and non-random survival and a non-random reproduction, which is why, as the generations go by, animals get better at doing what they do. That is quintessentially non-random. It does not mean there's a purpose in the sense of a human purpose, in the sense of a guiding principle which is thought up in advance. With hindsight, you can say something like a bird's wing looks as though it has a purpose. A human eye looks as though it has a purpose, but it has come about through the process of non-random natural selection. There is no purpose in the human sense. There's a kind of pseudo-purpose, but it's not a purpose in the human sense of conscious guiding. But above all, I must stress that Darwinian evolution is a non-random process. And one of the biggest misunderstandings, which I'm sorry to say the Cardinals just perpetrated, is that evolution is a random process. It is the opposite of a random process.
A brief response to that, if you can.
Yes, that is fascinating, because most evolutionary biologists today believe that the animal world is developing according to patterns, which we're starting to know more and more about them. And
are you referring to intelligent design?
no, I'm not. I'm leaving that right to one side.
Do you believe in intelligent design?
I believe
that there's an intelligent designer?
I believe God is intelligent.
No, but
how we work...
It's obviously a loaded question, but do you believe in intelligent design and an intelligent designer?
It all depends what you mean. I believe God created the world. I'm not entirely sure how it works out scientifically. But I wonder, whether Richard believes that the order, the patterns we see in nature, whether they are real or whether they're an illusion.
I'm going to leave that question
They
up in the
are
air.
real.
All right. OK, that's a quick answer. Let's go to our next...